Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. My guest today is Nabhan Islam, and he is an MSL with Sanofi. And we talk about his recent interview process and the modern complexities that exist versus prior years of interviewing. So, great conversation, really interesting stuff. I hope you guys enjoy it. Don't forget to check us out for MSL Talk Live, which is a once-a-month panel discussion, which we do on LinkedIn Live. Look for the announcements on LinkedIn, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to MSL Talk with Tom Caravela, a podcast specifically designed for MSLs and all things field medical. Hey, Nabhan, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, always a pleasure. So, guys, you may recognize this name. So, Nabhan has been with me before. We've done some podcasts in the past. So, he had come up with a great idea, which is very timely. So, we're going to get to that in a minute. But why don't you do a quick introduction and tell everybody who you are, where you're from, all that good stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So my name's Nabhan Islam. I'm a physician by training. I'm based in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. By the time this airs, I will have started a new position as an MSL with Sanofi Canada, representing type 1 diabetes in Western Canada. Previously, I was an MSL with Syneos Health and GSK. Before we start, I do need to state that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are my own and don't represent that of Sanofi Canada or any of my previous employers.
Awesome. Cool. And before we jump into it, I also have a quick announcement. So I want to invite all aspiring MSLs to a free webinar that Sarah Snyder and I are doing on May 1st. And that is called How to Land an MSL Position Without Experience. So check us out if you're on the market and you're looking for an MSL position. I think we have a lot of really good information. So follow me on LinkedIn. You'll see the announcements and you can register online and we'll see you at the webinar. So guys, we're going to talk about the complexities of the modern and current job market because the interviewing process has changed pretty significantly in the past few years, I would say. And so, Nabhan, you recently completed a successful job search. And congratulations, by the way. I know you started a new job on Monday, correct?
Thanks. Yes, that's right, Tom.
Awesome. That's great. So tell me, what were you expecting as you entered into this job market? Meaning, what was the experience that you were used to? Let's start there. And then we're going to talk about how different it is now.
Yeah, so I started applying to industry in 2018. And I think at the time, the experience that I went through was very representative of the system that had been in place for like 5, 10, 20 years prior. And basically, we're going to call this like a four-step process, right? Like you get a call back from a recruiter. You talk to them for like 15, 20 minutes. They just basically, ask you why you're interested in the position. They verify your therapeutic area experience. They, maybe ask you a couple of questions about work authorization and that sort of thing. And that's it, right? And then the next step would be talking to the hiring manager. So this is like, 30 minutes to an hour. They're going to be asking you some questions, again, kind of why you're interested in the position. What are you bringing to the table? They might ask you some behavioral questions. That's that step. If you get called back, it's typically the panel presentation. So 30 minutes to an hour, you typically present on a pivotal trial or some other seminal research. 15, 20-minute presentation, 15 minutes, Q&A. Usually there's other people on the panel that will ask you some questions as well. And, after an hour, it's over. And sometimes, but not always, you kind of need like a blessing from like someone in senior management. So this would typically be like the CMO. It could be the VP of medical affairs or, your department head. It's just more of like a sit down, get to know you kind of chit chat. They give the blessing to the hiring manager and that's it. So that was my experience in 2018, and there were very few deviations from that.
And I think that's what a lot of people are used to. I guess if you haven't been on the market recently. That's really pretty much the standard kind of protocol for hiring and for interviews. So what's it like now?
Yeah, so I was, kind of involved in a job search, kind of in the pandemic area, and then, more recently for this position that I'm starting. And one thing I've noticed, for example, is that there might be additional rounds. Like, let's say you have like the four core rounds, but like one company, for example, that I was interviewing with had like two check-in rounds. So basically, there was an extra interview with the hiring manager before like the official hiring manager interview, and then one after, like a prequel and a sequel. And what they told me was like my opportunity to, just relay like how the hiring process was going. It was an opportunity for me to ask questions of the company, for me to do all of these things. But like they were still, the hiring manager was still asking me questions, right? There was like, it was very obvious there was still behavioral questions. It was still like a checklist. So it was kind of like part of the hiring manager interview, even though, they were considered, quote unquote check-in rounds. Another thing that happened is that I had to provide answers in advance of
Hmm.
certain stages. So, for example, if anyone's gone through this recently, like a very common question that you might get is, can you give an example of when you were able to explain a complex topic to a KOL, right? And usually you just kind of like, give an example, you kind of talk through it, and that's the most they want out of you. So for this company, I had to provide it on paper in advance of the interview. So basically, like literally, I had to take a blank piece of paper. I had to find all the colored markers and pens that I could find, because I don't have any. And basically, I had to like illustrate something for them, and then basically scan it, send it to them, and then when I had the actual interview, we talked about it. So that was a bit unexpected. And then one thing that I've noticed now a lot is that you get like asked more questions about strategy. So even though you're an MSL, and we kind of all know what an MSL does, the bread and butter of it, a lot of questions were about strategy and territory management. But typically that was relegated to other roles. So yeah, it was. These are all things I've noticed in the last couple of years, and it seems to be just becoming the norm now.
Yeah, I mean it sounds like there's a lot more details involved now. And I don't know if maybe because since COVID and everything went virtual, companies started to get into the habit of additional screenings because they weren't meeting people live. So now they had to figure out different methods and more steps and add-ons to further vet out candidates and screen candidates and maybe compare from one candidate to then. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, so I'm not sure why. And I know you're not asking me why, but I'm just thinking like there's got to be a reason for all these details now versus before. And that might just be it. We may have just evolved into this new place where this is the new norm. So it's not, and I'm saying this because I don't want job seekers to think that like it's you. Because I think a lot of times when I talk to job seekers that are frustrated, they're like, I'm jumping through all these hoops and I've never had to do this before. Why am I doing this now? Well, just realize it's probably not you. It's probably not a Nabhan thing. It's probably not a you thing. It's probably just the way the evolution of the interview process has gone post COVID. Now, again, I'm just spitballing, but it sounds from what you're saying that there were add-ons and additional steps. So was there anything that they added on that you just completely didn't expect?
Yeah, so one thing I had to do was situational awareness. I think probably most people on the podcast or listening to the podcast are probably familiar with like SWOT analysis. There's also like
Yeah.
C's, force, five forces, pick your poison. Again, that's something that's like typically reserved for like medical advisors or scientific advisors, someone applying for like a strategic position, right? Usually MSLs are responsible for kind of executing the medical plan, so to speak, not necessarily having any input on that. So that was a first for me. If my line manager is listening to this, he's probably having a chuckle. But I had to do like a full-on situational awareness, like put it in PowerPoint and actually present it to my panel. So that was a bit of a reach or something new for me, we'll say. Another thing I had to do was a personality test. And it wasn't just like one of those inane 5 question things on social media, like answer these 5 questions, we'll tell you what kind of penguin suits you best, right? It was just kind of like, it was like a full on personality test. So something very similar to like the Myers-Briggs thing. And it was kind of funny at the time. It was like, when I logged onto the portal, it was like, this will take you 20 minutes. And I was like, great, I can do this during my lunch break, no problem. And it ended up taking me an hour because it was like, yeah, it was like 45, 50 questions. And, you could tell like it was statistically validated. There were matching paired questions. And then you kind of like wondering like, what are they looking for, right? Like, are they looking for a certain personality to maybe like round up the team, or maybe are they looking for someone that's a little more driven because that's just the company culture, right? So, it really like plays tricks with your mind. And then the other thing was a bio slide. So normally, like they ask you questions, and just typically in the course of talking, you talk about like your family, you talk about your hobbies, your interests, that sort of thing. But for this company, I actually had to put it in a PowerPoint and with some pictures, and they were like, it's up to you, personal, professional. We want, a 5 to 10 minute presentation about you. So that in itself is kind of a dilemma because, like, on one hand, it's like you're applying for a job and there's a certain picture you want to paint, but at the same time, it's also like an opportunity for you for them to kind of get to know you, right? And are you going to be like a good fit for this team? So it's like, okay, do I talk about my family? Do I talk about my pets? Do I talk about my hobbies? Um, you know, uh, does this picture make me look good? This or that? So it's kind of a dilemma in itself, right? Like what kind of picture do you want to paint? So these were all um, a little unexpected things I had done before in previous years while interviewing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think that, again, evaluating all this detail, I think that it might be because we have access to a lot more information and tools and techniques now than we ever did. I mean, it's not that we didn't have the internet 5 years ago, but I'm just saying it's so easy to administer these tests and tools now. It's not like you need full departments to do personality tests. Everything's online.
Mhm.
The barrier of entry for these things is really nothing, and they're inexpensive, and it's just a matter of having somebody implement it. So maybe because of the fact that it's become so accessible to have these different steps, companies are just like, well, we might as well incorporate that because that'll help us to navigate and narrow down the applicant pool better, maybe than we have in the past. I don't know. I'm spitballing here. Um, so I think there's a lot of reasons, but now that you've gone through this most recent process, again, you're starting a new job, so you just finished this whole thing. Why do you think, as you look back and look at all these things that have changed, why do you think companies are doing all this stuff now?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons, and I think they're all kind of related. You've brought up in some of your more recent podcasts, there are more people trying to break in than ever.
Mm.
But the number that kind of progress to each round really hasn't changed. So just as an example, back in 2018, some recruiters, would give me feedback, and they're like, okay, we're interviewing, or sorry, like 100 people applied. We're going to be screening about 30 to 40 of them. 10 of them will speak to the hiring manager. 5 of them will be invited for a panel presentation, and then we'll make a job offer to 2 people, right? Like the top candidate and then a backup. So right now there could be like 500 people applying for that same position. That doesn't mean that they're going to be screening 5 times as many people. It doesn't mean like 5 times as many people are going to be talking to the hiring manager. It doesn't mean like 5 times as many people are going to be interviewed or invited for a panel presentation. So they need to, I think, move like the harder steps earlier in the process to help, as you said, kind of, um, figure out kind of who's qualified and who's unqualified. I think second is that, speaking to your point about, accessibility, is that, you know, we know what the process is, like candidates know. So like, 10 years ago, we didn't have all these resources like MSL Society. We didn't have like, podcasts and all of these kinds of things. So maybe candidates were kind of caught by surprise, or maybe candidates, weren't able to prepare for all the questions that they received, like the behavioral questions. So nowadays, you can almost expect behavioral questions, and we kind of know what they are, right? Like, for example, like I don't think I've ever gone through an interview where I wasn't asked at least once, can you give me a time, can you give us an example of when you had a conflict with a client or a physician or a KOL, and how did you resolve it, right? That's just like a bread and butter behavioral question. So candidates these days, everyone's going into an interview prepared to answer that question. So, it doesn't help us to differentiate candidates from one another. So again, we have to, use other steps or other asks to help figure out, again, who do we want, who do we not. And then I think the last thing, again, to your point, post-COVID, is that MSLs are expected to have more input. So I think MSLs seem to be having more input on medical strategy, either formally or informally. In one of your earlier podcasts, you mentioned AI might be doing some of the heavy lifting now. So, MSLs might be expected to do other things, right? Like, what are they going to do with their time if they're not working on insights? And then, just as an example, I think, some company cultures, they just want MSLs to do other things. So there was one company that I was interviewing with, and they were like, we expect MSLs to actually have to be involved with actual research. Like, you're expected to actually work with a company, essentially act essentially as an internal IIS, work with external KOLs, do research, and publish a paper involving our products, right? And it's not something that's typically, it's not something that's typical for MSLs. So I think all of those things kind of are all snowballing together, and this has kind of led to the current situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense because there's way more involved in the MSL role now than ever before. It's become more complex. It's just there's a lot more expected. The role's evolved in a lot of ways. It's advanced into a whole nother place. So in turn, it kind of makes sense that the interview process is more complex. And the process of vetting candidates and screening candidates has become more complex. And I think, I mean, I don't want to continue to repeat myself, but I think that this may just be the normal evolution of the hiring process. I don't think it's ever going to get any easier. I guess if it were a less competitive market, maybe, I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily one of the main criteria, but I think that all the stuff that we're talking about right now, hopefully, is going to help the job seekers of today, people that are actually in the interview process now, or people that are listening to this in the future will realize it's going to require more preparation time. It's going to require, a lot of extra effort and detail. You mentioned the conflict resolution behavioral question, which is very common, but it's like that's great, but it's like almost hiring managers are expecting everybody to do a really good job on those questions because they are expected, right? There's so many resources and tools available for us to prepare. So knowing that, having gone through this, what advice do you have for job seekers in what they should be doing to help better prepare right now?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is you have to be ready for any ask at any step of the process. So, if I think, for example, like previously, recruiters would not ask you behavioral questions, right? They're just kind of like, going through the checklist and deciding whether you speak to the hiring manager or not. So I can think of a couple times where I have been asked a behavioral question by the recruiter, and I think that's just part of their screening process. So we can't rely on kind of the old model anymore. You have to be ready for really any ask at any step of the process. So don't just be like, okay, I'm just talking to the hiring manager, or sorry, I'm just speaking to the recruiter. I don't have to be ready for this. It's not going to come up because it could come up. And if you're not ready, they're going to figure that out really quickly. Second, I think again, to your point, is like you really have to be ready to kind of dedicate the time to focus on the task at hand. So one thing I've noticed is like the turnarounds for interviews are getting shorter. So for example, like for panel presentations, it's typically now like 48 or 72 hours. And that could be over a weekend. So I had one company that basically sent me a pivotal paper on Friday morning, and they're like, we need you to present this on Monday morning. So if you have family, if you're working, a full-time job, if you've got school, it kind of puts you in a really awkward spot because it's like, okay, do I blow off my family because I need to, do this for myself, do this for my future, or am I going to tell the company this is going to work out for me and move on to something else? So you really have to be ready to just really sit down at your computer and like turn off your phone, close the door, and just like get to work. It's really time consuming. And then I think the last thing is you really need to kind of bring out the big guns very early, right? Like it is a very competitive market. You are probably competing against people who have very similar qualifications and very similar to drive to you. And you really need to kind of bring your A game. So, back in the day, I remember when I first put together my panel presentations, I would just use whatever clip art was available in Microsoft Office, and usually it would just do the job, right? You could just kind of cut and paste graphs from the pivotal trials, and that was that. So for this most recent job, like I remember I had to go on BioRender and do diagrams. And I spent a couple hours just on 2 diagrams because those diagrams weren't available on the internet, it wasn't available in the pivotal paper. And there was a story I was trying to tell when I was doing my panel presentation, and I just didn't have the graphics to support it. So I went on BioRender and played around and kind of got the diagrams that I wanted. And after I'd been offered the job, the national director had told me like it was very obvious that you put the work into this. It was very obviously professionally done, and we appreciate that. So you really just have to bring your A game. Like you have to go all in and give it the best that you have because you're not going to get another chance, right? Like this is your shot. Make sure that you're doing the very best that you can.
Well, and you're competing against others. It's you're not going uncontested. So, I mean, that's great advice where if you don't go all in, you're going to lose out to somebody else that is. That's really the bottom line. So not only are you getting tested by so the these companies are finding new ways to test candidates and to challenge candidates just by all the hoops and things that you're explaining that you kind of have to go through and prepare for and execute on all these different things. But then you also have to realize as you're going through this preparation process and the execution of this, you're competing against somebody else that may be same or more qualified than you. So I think this is a really important episode in kind of it's not a wake-up call, but I think it's a realization of just how competitive and intense the job search process is now, how important it is that you're prepared and proactive, and what you need to expect. So looking at all of those things that I just discussed, like, are there any other like pitfalls or challenges maybe that you want to share with people that you saw?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Tom. So you've brought this up in many previous podcasts, but definitely don't lie or embellish anything. It will come out sooner or later. Even just like going back to like a personality test, like you might think to yourself, okay, I've done disc profile before, and maybe they're looking for like a D, right? Those are the drivers, those are the people that get the results, and I'm going to try and fudge the answers. But like these tests have been around for decades, they're specifically validated. You can't fool them, right? And even when they're talking to you, they'll figure it out. Like this doesn't mesh with what we have, right? So be honest with yourself, be honest with the company. You don't really know what they're looking for, and it may turn out that you are exactly the right candidate, right? So just be yourself, be honest. Don't try and lie or embellish or deceive anyone at any step of the process. Second, that being said, just be a little careful what you draw attention to, right? So I remember, way back when I was backpacking through South America, a lot of the countries aren't very friendly, and tourists can usually get by, but they usually hassle the locals sometimes. So I remember, like when I was, I think in Ecuador, We were all sitting at this beachside cafe, just drinking beers, just talking about whatever. And these people had talked about how they had basically like run across the border from Colombia, I think, because there was some situation, there was some tension, and they just wanted to keep backpacking. So um, they would get up in the middle of the night, like midnight, 1 a.m., run across like this field, couple hundred meters to get to the border with Ecuador, and then they would present themselves to customs and then get into the country. So it makes for a great story,
Hmm.
but if you're doing this on your bio slide, thinking to yourself, hey, this is going to be like an amazing story. This is going to get their attention. This is really exciting. It also kind of gives the impression that you don't respect the rule of law and basically you take, unnecessary risks, right? And in this industry, like that's not what the hiring manager is looking for at all, right? So just be careful what you draw attention to. Again, you're trying to paint a picture of yourself. Lastly, always remember to focus on the positive. So I've learned this lesson the hard way many times. I think it's just human nature. Your caveman amygdala is just trying to protect you from all the dangers in the outside world. And we sometimes tend to focus like on the negative. So you brought up in many, of your podcasts, people are asked like, why are you looking for a new opportunity, or why did you leave your previous position? And people tend to sometimes get bogged down on the negative, right? And it's understandable. Like maybe you're coming from a toxic work environment, maybe you're just being unfulfilled, but you really have to kind of turn that into a positive, right? Like this isn't the company that you're applying for. You've brought this up. What are you bringing to the table? How are you going to make us better? How are you going to represent our team, our portfolio, our company? So, you really have to focus on the positive. So let's just say, for example, in a previous position, you just weren't getting the opportunities you were looking for, right? So, that's fine. You can say that, but then, turn it into a positive. Say, I've spoken to some of your MSLs and sales reps. They talk about what a great work environment you have. They've been talking about all the opportunities and side projects they've been able to do. That's something I'm really interested in. That's something I would really like to do or apply myself to. That's why I want this position, right? So, and you've essentially taken kind of a negative and turned it into a positive. So always focus on the positive.
Yeah, and I want to point out that the three things you just mentioned are all things the company is going to be looking for. They're going to be looking to see if you can support the claims you're making. So if you're fabricating something, I should say fabricating, I'm not going to make assumptions that people lie, but sometimes people exaggerate. So it's difficult to exaggerate in this day and age because we have so many resources to kind of back check and fact check and see what exactly people have done. So you have to be careful because companies are going to be looking for that. They are going to absolutely look and pay very close attention to what you are pointing out. So the stories you tell, the information that you share, how you share it, like all that's going to be evaluated against other candidates, and it's going to position you in a certain way. So be careful what you highlight. And then the negativity thing is real, man. It's real. Employers are going to lull you into a false sense of security so that you'll let your guard down and then you'll start being your true self, whatever that is. So if you go negative naturally, and I'm not saying that it just might be your personality. So if you're in a situation where company asks you, tell me about why you want to leave your current position, and you really should practice a diplomatic answer. And like Nabhan said, you want to make sure that there's a positive spin to that and you're not just bashing or going negative, whether it's on that question or any other question, because companies are looking for that sort of thing. Not only are they looking for it, they may actually try to, I'm not going to use the word trick, but they might try to get you to or want to see how you are when you let your guard down. They might get really, really super comfortable. I've had managers curse in interviews. That doesn't mean you need to curse in the interview. You don't have to match that. A lot of people are like, oh, well, match the energy. Yeah, but be careful because it might be a trick. So that's just a couple of things that I wanted to add to that because I see it happen all the time. So last, I don't want to take up too much more time, but I do want to give you one last. I know that there's got to be one more tidbit, maybe some piece of advice that maybe we didn't get to. So final thought.
Yeah, so it's a really tough job market. Again, I'm speaking for Canada in particular, but from what I've been hearing, it's a really tough job market in the US as well. So I think you need to brace yourself. There is going to be like a lot of disappointment. Um, Someone on one of your previous podcasts, she mentioned like she had applied to like 70 positions, right?
Yeah.
So like there's going to be a lot of disappointment. I think you really do have to kind of brace yourself for that, but you have to really keep at it. Like I think there really is a company in a position that's right for you. It's just a matter of like, you when you're going through the interview, like you have to kind of prove it to the company, right? You have to prove that you're absolutely the perfect candidate for this. So you have to keep at it. There's a couple of podcasts I kind of want to highlight that I found were really helpful. There's one from last fall. It's like I think 13 common mistakes that people make. So have a listen to that. You had a more recent podcast, how job seekers can stand out in a crowded market. Definitely worth a listen. There's a podcast about grit, and there's a podcast about don't going alone. So, having someone to kind of be your partner in crime, so to speak, definitely very, very helpful, and it helps a lot. I think second is like don't forget the basics. So there are, again, to our earlier point, there are so many resources available now that weren't available 5, 10, 15 years ago. So, MSL Society has a couple of courses that you can do as an aspiring MSL, either in person or online. Tom, you're starting to offer things to aspiring MSLs, the podcast in question. There's also MAPS and a whole bunch of other organizations, right? So go to their website, see what's available, see if you can kind of take something that will give you the foundation that you need to be a better applicant, to be a better candidate. I also really strongly recommend going to a conference and meeting people in person. So nothing really beats showing up face to face, introducing yourself, shaking someone's hand, giving them a smile, giving them a business card, giving them your elevator pitch, so to speak. Because all things equal, hiring managers, it's better to deal with the devil that you know than the devil you don't, right? So if they have a whole bunch of applicants and not sure who to advance to the next round, they're going to remember, okay, there was this guy I met at, this conference and he seemed really friendly. So all things being equal, they're going to offer the interview to the guy who was friendly as opposed to the guy they don't know, right? So nothing beats that. Like I strongly, strongly recommend networking in person and doing these workshops and making yourself a better candidate. Lastly, I would say, considering how competitive it is, consider like professional coaching. So there are companies and individuals that offer professional like coaching when it comes to like interviews or working on your resume or whatever it happens to be. So if you feel like you're stuck at a certain step and you've tried your best and you just can't seem to get any further, you might need like an outside perspective, right? And you might need someone who does this kind of for a living and kind of knows the system inside and out and can really kind of tease apart what the issue is and help you to fix it. Those things, do cost money, but the way I look at it is like you're making an investment in yourself, right? Traveling to conferences costs money, but it's an investment in yourself, right? Taking one of these courses, yes, it costs money, but it's an investment in yourself, right? So, having a careers coach or, paying for, counseling or coaching services, yes, it does cost money, but again, it's an investment in yourself. And I think it can really help if you feel that you're stuck somewhere.
It's great advice. I mean, everything you just said, great advice. I agree with all of it wholeheartedly. I'm a big networker, so the in-person thing about going to conferences, wholeheartedly agree. And then as far as the resources, I think you just have to figure out what is the biggest need for you before you select a resource. And the reason I say that is, and I appreciate, Nabhan, I appreciate you mentioning the prior episodes on this podcast. This podcast is free. So there's answers for a lot of the questions that you have somewhere in the episodes of this podcast. The difference, though, is it's free, but you might have to go through a lot of information to get the answers that you need. So if you're seeking a position and you're having trouble and you need to find a course or a coach, well, then maybe that's the next step, but that's going to cost money. And if you have the budget, great. But if you're looking for and you think you need a certification of some sort, I would be careful, because a certification is not going to get you a job. It's going to get you a certification. You're going to educate yourself on something. So just understand the distinctions. This is why Sarah Snyder and I started the Aspire MSL program, because we walk you through a step-by-step process on what you need to do to get a job. And again, I'm not here to plug that. I'm just saying that the whole purpose of that was, if you're not getting the answers through the free resources that are out there or anything else that you've gone to, well, there is a place that you can go where you can get the answers. It's just going to cost you a couple of bucks. And then finally, you had mentioned, it's funny that you mentioned the episode of 13 common interview mistakes. So that was the most downloaded episode of 2023.
Okay.
Believe it or not. So clearly it's helped a lot of people. So if you guys are interested, check that out. Nabhan, this was awesome. This was really, really good information. I feel like people that are on the job market may need to listen to this again. If you got value in this, please share it with other people that are on the market, because I think that they will benefit from this. But my friend, appreciate you coming on. You're awesome. And best of luck in your new job as you start on Monday. And we'll keep in touch. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom. Always a pleasure.
Awesome. Okay, guys, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the show. And if you enjoyed it, please subscribe so that you don't miss an episode in the future. And feel free to leave a rating or a review or a comment. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you soon.